The email arrived at 6:47 in the morning, and Daniel already knew the day was going to go wrong before he finished reading the subject line. He was standing in his kitchen, still in yesterday's shirt, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago without him noticing. That was how he lived now, forgetting to drink things, forgetting to eat on time, forgetting, sometimes, what he had walked into a room to do. His therapist called it a dissociated response to unresolved grief. Daniel called it Tuesday. He read the email twice. The company's annual gala, hosted by Adeyemi Financial Solutions, the firm where Daniel had worked for the past 14 months as vice president of finance, was scheduled for the following Saturday. Black tie, the Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom, guest list of 300, dinner, speeches, dancing. And at the very bottom of the email, in the small section marked Confirmed External Guests, he saw her name. Lydia Crane. Not Lydia Osei anymore. She had gone back to her maiden name 8 months after the divorce was finalized. He knew this the way he knew most things he wished he didn't, through a mutual friend who mentioned it casually over lunch, as though it were weather. He set the mug down on the counter. He picked it back up. He set it down again. Lydia was coming to the gala because she worked for one of the firm's largest partner companies. Of course she did. The world was not large enough, apparently, to put adequate distance between a man and his former life. He had known, in the vague way you know things you refuse to examine too closely, that they operated in overlapping professional circles. He had simply chosen to believe that the circles would never actually overlap. They were overlapping, on Saturday, at 7 in the evening, in a ballroom. He was going to have to be there. His presence was not optional. He had helped organize the financial portion of the event, and was scheduled to speak for 4 minutes about the company's performance in the third quarter. Simone Adeyemi, the CEO, had personally put his name on the program. You did not remove your name from Simone Adeyemi's program. He arrived at the office at 8:15, which was 40 minutes later than usual, and something that had never happened before. He took the elevator to the 14th floor, walked past the open plan section where 3 members of his team were already at their desks, returned every good morning he received with something that resembled a good morning, and sat down in his office with the door not quite closed. He opened a new spreadsheet. Column A he labeled, Things I Can Control. He sat there for a while. Column B he left blank. There was a knock at the door, and his assistant, a 26-year-old named Owen who was frighteningly good at reading rooms, stepped in with a printed copy of the gala itinerary and the expression of someone who had decided not to ask any questions today. The CEO wants to see the Q3 summary by 10, Owen said. She moved the time from 11. Fine, Daniel said. Owen left without asking about the spreadsheet. Daniel finished the Q3 summary in 45 minutes, which was less time than it usually took and probably showed, though not in any way anyone could point to specifically. The numbers were correct. They were always correct. Numbers were the one area of his life that had not developed the habit of looking like one thing and being another. He gathered the report, took the elevator to the 16th floor, and stood outside Simone Adeyemi's office door. The glass panels on either side of the door meant you could see into the office before you knocked. Simone was on a call, standing at the window with her back to the room, looking out at the city the way she always did, like it owed her something, and she was being patient about collecting. She was wearing a dark green blazer that she'd had on when he passed her in the corridor at 7 the previous evening. He did not know if she'd gone home. He knocked. She turned, glanced at him, and held up one finger. He waited. She finished the call in 2 sentences and hung up without a closing remark. Q3, she said. It was not a question. Yes, he said, and placed the folder on her desk. She opened it, flipped to the second page, and ran her finger down the column of figures with the focused attention of someone who found numbers genuinely interesting, which she did. Simone Adeyemi had a master's degree in applied mathematics and had built the company at 31 years old, out of a shared office space, a laptop with a cracked screen, and what several early employees had later described as an unreasonable certainty that she was right. Daniel stood on the other side of her desk and said nothing, because there was nothing to say yet. She would find what she was looking for, or she would ask a question, and either way the meeting would proceed in a straight line, which was how meetings with Simone always went. The Harlow account variance, she said. Walk me through your thinking. He walked her through it. She listened without interrupting, which meant she agreed with the reasoning. If she'd disagreed, she would have interrupted at the second sentence. Fine, she said, and closed the folder. She looked at him then, and this was the part that always caught Daniel slightly off guard. The way Simone Adeyemi's full attention felt like standing under a spotlight that was not unkind, but was absolutely, completely honest. You look like something happened, she said. It was not a question, and it was not small talk. It was an observation delivered the way she delivered everything. Plainly, without decoration, and with the patience of someone who was prepared to wait for the truth. He had prepared, on the elevator ride up, to say nothing. He had been very clear with himself about that. He was going to deliver the report, answer any questions, and leave. He was going to handle this the way he handled most things. Quietly, competently, alone. He heard himself say, Lydia's going to be at the gala. Simone said nothing. She picked up her pen, then set it back down. My ex-wife, he added, which was unnecessary because Simone had been his CEO for 14 months and knew what had happened the way any perceptive person in close professional proximity knew the significant facts of the people around them, not through being told, but through the steady accumulation of small evidence. I know who Lydia is, Simone said. She's bringing someone, Daniel said. He hadn't known that for certain until he said it, but he knew it. Of course she was. It had been 2 years. She was warm and funny and disciplined, and exactly the kind of woman that someone new and decent would find and hold on to quickly. He had known it intellectually for months. He had not yet allowed himself to picture it. He was picturing it now, in his CEO's office, at 10 in the morning. He was doing very well. What is it you're asking me? Simone said. This was the other thing about her. She did not let you stay in the vague middle space where you sort of ask something without quite asking it. She pulled the real question out of you by simply not accepting the substitute. Daniel took a breath. I need someone to come with me, he said. Not just someone. I need it to look like I'm doing well. Better than well. I need it to look like I've moved forward. Simone was quiet for a moment. You're asking me to attend the gala with you as your partner, she said. As my girlfriend, he said, because there was no point being imprecise. For one evening, in front of the right people. You don't have to. I understand if it's completely out of the question, and I'll never bring it up again, and I will find another way to. Yes, she said. He stopped. She had already picked up her pen again. I have one condition, she said, not looking up. If we're going to do this, we do it properly. That means at the moment it counts. When she sees us together, when it needs to be real, there has to be something real. One moment. One thing no one can question. She looked up then. One kiss, she said. Convincing enough to matter. I don't do things halfway, Daniel. You know that. He did know that. He had worked with her for 14 months, and he had never once seen her do anything halfway. She looked back down at her papers, and he understood that the meeting was over. The decision had been made, and the conversation would not be revisited or revised. He picked up the folder, which she no longer needed. He stood there for 2 seconds longer than was necessary. Then he walked back to the elevator, and the door closed behind him, and he stood inside it looking at the small illuminated number above the door, which was the least complicated thing in his life at that exact moment. On his phone, he opened the spreadsheet. He typed one word in column B, Simone. Then he deleted it, because that was a data point that told him nothing useful, and the elevator delivered him back to the 14th floor, and he went back to his desk, and he did not look at column B again for the rest of the day. But he thought about it. He thought about the exact flat tone of her voice when she said yes before he had finished the sentence. He thought about the way she had not made it a favor or a kindness or something she was doing for him. She had made it a transaction, clean and equal, with one condition attached, and the condition was so specific and so direct that it had stopped all the air in the room for a moment. One kiss, convincing enough to matter. He thought about Lydia, too. He thought about the last time he had seen her, at a mutual friend's dinner 8 months ago, when she had been polite and warm, and had asked about his work with the kind of genuine interest that made everything harder rather than easier. He thought about the drive home afterward and the specific silence of an empty apartment and the spreadsheet he had opened that night. Column A, column B. He thought about a woman standing at a 16th floor window, looking at a city like it owed her something. He closed his laptop at 7 that evening and took the long way home, the route that passed through the part of the city that was loudest and most crowded, because silence was not what he needed tonight. He needed, he thought, a plan. He had one now. It was not a plan he had anticipated making. It was not in any version of column A he had ever written. But Simone Adeyemi had said yes, and she had said it without hesitation, and that was the kind of data point that meant something even when you couldn't yet say what. Saturday was 6 days away. He straightened his collar in the window of a shop he was passing. He didn't know he did that when he was nervous. Not yet. Simone Adeyemi had a rule about keeping professional and personal matters in separate rooms of her mind. She had maintained this rule for 11 years, across 3 companies, 2 cities, and one occasion when a managing director at a competitor firm had asked her to dinner 7 times before accepting, gracefully and without drama, that the answer was not going to change. The rule had served her well. She was not thinking about the rule on Monday morning, when Daniel Osei knocked on her office door at 8:52, holding 2 cups of coffee from the place on the ground floor of the building, one of which, she understood without being told, was for her. She looked at the cup. He set it on the edge of her desk. "We should talk about the logistics," he said, "before the week runs away from us." She had agreed to attend the gala as his girlfriend. She had stated one condition. She was not a person who reversed decisions once they were made, and she was not going to start now. But she was also a person who understood that the space between agreeing to a thing and doing a thing required careful navigation, particularly when the thing in question was going to be performed in front of 300 people, at least 30 of whom reported to her. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She noticed that he had arrived at the office before her this morning, which meant he had arrived before 7:30, which was information she stored without comment. "Cover story," he said, opening the notepad he'd brought. "We don't need a complicated one," she said. "Simple things are harder to unravel." "Agreed. How long have we been together?" 4 months, she said. "Long enough to be settled. Short enough that no one expects us to have told them yet." He wrote this down. "How did it start?" he asked. She picked up the coffee he had brought and took a drink. It was exactly right. No sugar, a small amount of something she couldn't name, that made it slightly better than standard. She filed this away. "You stayed late one Thursday to finish the Harrington projections," she said. "I came back from a dinner and you were still here. We talked for an hour about something that wasn't work." She looked at him. "You pick what it was." "Architecture," he said, without hesitating. "Old buildings. I said the Meridian Hotel had better bones than anything built in the last 20 years. Something shifted at the edge of her expression. Not quite a smile. The absence of the thing that wasn't a smile. "That works," she said. "And you?" "I told you were wrong about the Whitmore building on 5th, she said, "and you made a reasonable case, and I conceded one point, and we went home separately and nothing was said until the following week." He looked at her. "You've thought about this already," he said. "I don't agree to things I haven't thought about," she said. This was true, and he knew it. He had worked for her for 14 months. He had watched her in board meetings and investor calls, and one particularly brutal negotiation with a client who had come in with the intention of reducing their contract value and had left having increased it. She did not agree to things without thinking. She did not do anything without thinking. He wrote something else in the notepad. "The physical things," he said, keeping his voice entirely professional, which she noted. "We should decide what's natural and what isn't, so neither of us hesitates." "You put your hand on my back when you guide me through a crowd," she said. "I touch your arm when I'm making a point. If we're standing still and talking to someone, I stand close enough that our arms are touching, not holding hands, unless the moment specifically calls for it." "What moments call for it?" "When she's watching," Simone said. He was quiet for a second. "And the condition," he said. The kiss, she said plainly, because she was not going to allow either of them to talk around it for the next 6 days. Once. Your call on the timing. You'll know when it needs to happen. I'll know. You know her, Simone said. I don't. You know what will register with her and what won't. I trust your judgment on the moment. She paused. In every other respect, you follow my lead. You're not good at pretending, Daniel. I've watched you try to be polite to people you find irritating, and it's visible from 20 feet away. He opened his mouth. Don't argue with that, she said. He closed his mouth. Fine, he said. So we spend some time this week, she said. Not practicing, but becoming fluent. There's a difference. Practicing means you're performing a script. Fluency means you've stopped thinking about the words. He looked at her for a moment with the focused expression he usually reserved for financial models, like he was trying to understand the underlying structure of something. Dinner, he said. Wednesday evening. Somewhere that isn't work, isn't formal, isn't anything we have to dress up for. We just talk. About what? Whatever it is we talked about on that Thursday evening, he said. The thing we have to actually know, so that when someone at the gala asks us about it, we don't hesitate. She considered this for 3 seconds. 7 o'clock, she said. The restaurant on Hadley Street, the one with the green door. I know it, he said. I know you do, she said. You recommended it to Owen for his partner's birthday last month. You said the fish was better than it had any right to be. He had said that. He didn't remember mentioning it in her presence. She did not explain how she knew. She simply picked up her pen, which was the signal that the meeting was over. He took his notepad and left. She looked at the coffee cup he had brought, which was still sitting on the edge of her desk. She put it on her side of the desk. Then she picked up her pen and got back to work, and she did not think about it for the rest of the morning. She thought about it twice in the afternoon. Wednesday arrived the way weeks do when you have too many things scheduled, quickly, and with insufficient warning. Daniel was in 3 meetings before noon, and spent his lunch hour on a call with a client in another time zone who had a talent for making every question sound like an accusation. He settled 3 things, delegated a 4th, and left the office at 6:45, which was early by the standards of the week. He arrived at the restaurant before her. This did not surprise him. The restaurant on Hadley Street had 12 tables, low lighting, and walls the color of old paper. He had recommended it to Owen because it was the kind of place that made you feel like whatever you were discussing mattered, without making you feel like you had to sit up straight to earn it. He had been here twice before, both times alone, both times with a book he'd barely read. Simone arrived at 7 exactly. She was wearing something plain and dark that had clearly cost more than it looked like, which was the signature of a woman who had stopped needing clothes to announce her presence, because she did it herself simply by walking through a door. She sat down without ceremony. You got here early, she said. I'm always early, he said. I know, she said. It's one of the things that's slightly irritating, and also very useful. He looked at her. We're off the clock, she said. I can say what I actually think. Do you say what you think when we're on the clock? I say what's useful, she said. It's not always the same thing. The server came. They ordered. She asked one question about the preparation of something on the menu, received a satisfactory answer, and made her choice. He ordered without looking at the menu, which she noticed without mentioning. So, she said, once the server had gone, what do I need to know about you that isn't in your employee file? He leaned back slightly. You have my employee file memorized, he said. I have everyone's file memorized, she said. It's not impressive. It's just thorough. You grew up in Manchester. You studied economics and then accountancy because you liked the structure of it. You came to London at 24. You've been at 2 other firms. You were married for 3 years. You've been here 14 months, and in that time you have not taken a single personal day. He was quiet for a moment. That's what's in the file, he said. Yes, she said. So, tell me the rest. He thought about this, not about whether to answer, but about where to start, which was a different problem. The rest of a person was not a summary. It was a series of small things that didn't connect into a neat picture. He had been a person who read old history books on Sunday mornings. He had been a person who made his own bread for 2 years, and then stopped for a reason he couldn't fully name. He was a person who noticed architecture. He was a person who, at 34, was not entirely sure what he wanted next, which was something he had never said aloud, because saying it aloud made it more true than he was ready for. He told her a version of this, not all of it, some of it. She listened the way she did everything, completely, without interrupting, without the small sounds of agreement that most people made to signal they were tracking. She just listened, and her eyes stayed on him, and when he finished, she did not immediately speak, which meant she had actually heard him and was thinking about what he'd said. "I stopped reading for pleasure 2 years ago," she said then. "Not because I didn't want to, because the silence when I sat down to read reminded me that no one else was in the apartment, and I'd chosen that very deliberately, and I didn't want to examine the choice too closely." He looked at her. "I read reports instead," she said. "They don't require the same thing from you." "No," he said. "They don't." This was the longest personal exchange they had ever had in 14 months. He was aware of this. He thought she was too. The food arrived. They ate. They talked about the building they were in. She had looked it up before coming, and informed him that it was older than it appeared and had been, at various points in its history, a print shop, a private club, and a doctor's office. He told her about the proportions of the windows, which were slightly wrong in a way that was charming rather than troubling. She said she could see what he meant, and he believed that she actually could. They talked about the gala, about the order of the evening, about which of their colleagues were most likely to ask pointed questions, and what the answers would be. They talked about other things. At some point, he noticed this afterward, not during. He stopped keeping track of the time. The table was cleared. The server brought something small and sweet at the end, without being asked, which happened sometimes in restaurants that cared enough to pay attention. "Your collar," she said. He looked up. She reached across the table, very matter-of-factly, and adjusted the left side of his collar, which had folded in on itself sometime in the past hour. One motion, the back of her fingers briefly against his neck, her eyes on his collar, not his face, then her hand back on her side of the table. "You do that when you're nervous," she said. "It curls. You'll want to know that before Saturday so you can manage it." He did not say anything for a moment. "I wasn't nervous," he said. "I know," she said. "That's interesting, isn't it?" She picked up her glass. He looked at the side of his collar. They stayed for another 35 minutes. When they finally left, the restaurant was quieter than when they'd arrived, and the city outside the green door was doing what cities do at 9:30 on a Wednesday, carrying on without particular regard for the people moving through it. They walked to the end of the block where the street split. "Saturday," she said. "Saturday," he said. She turned and walked toward the car that was waiting for her, and he stood at the corner for a moment longer than he needed to. He thought about the way she had said, "That's interesting, isn't it?" without any visible feeling attached to it, like she was noting a variable in a calculation, like something had come up in the numbers that she hadn't accounted for. He thought about the fact that he had spoken more honestly tonight than he had in months, to a woman he worked for, in a restaurant on Hadley Street, over a dinner that was supposed to be preparation for a performance. He thought about his collar. He put his hand to it. It was perfectly straight, but he straightened it anyway, and then he went home, and the apartment was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, the quiet did not feel like evidence of anything. He opened the notepad when he got home. The small circle she had drawn was still there on the 3rd page. He stared at it for a while. He did not add anything to it. He was not ready to add anything to it. But he understood, in the way you understand a thing when the math finally lines up even though you haven't written the answer yet, that Wednesday evening had not been preparation. It had been something else. He just didn't have a column for it yet. The Grand Meridian Hotel was the kind of building that made you feel, the moment you stepped through its doors, that your life had been slightly too small until now. It had ceilings that knew what they were doing. The chandelier in the main lobby was not trying to impress anyone. It was simply very good at existing, which was more effective. Daniel had said this to Simone in the car on the way over, about the bones of old buildings, and she had said she reserved judgment until she saw it herself. She saw it herself now, and said nothing, which meant he was right. They had arrived together in the firm's car, sitting in the back with exactly the right amount of space between them, close enough to be believable, not so close that it felt rehearsed. She was wearing a deep navy dress with a structured neckline that was elegant without announcing itself, and she had worn her hair back in a way that made her look like someone who had made one decision this evening and it had been the correct one. He was wearing the dark charcoal suit that Owen had suggested and he had initially resisted, and he was grateful now that Owen had held firm on it. He had straightened his collar 3 times in the car without noticing. She had not said anything about it. The ballroom was already half full when they walked in. 300 people, or nearly, in a room lit by the kind of warm gold light that made everyone look like a slightly better version of themselves. Tables with white linens, a band warming up at the far end, waiters with trays moving in the efficient, invisible way that good events were built on. 14 of those 300 people reported directly to Simone. 6 of those 300 people had opinions about Daniel's private life that they had expressed, without being invited to, over the past 2 years. And somewhere in that room was Lydia Crane, with someone new, and a name Daniel was going to hear before the evening was over. Simone put her hand on his back as they moved through the entrance crowd. It was exactly the right pressure. Not possessive, not staged, the kind of touch that said, "I know where you are," without saying anything at all. He felt it through the jacket and made a small, involuntary adjustment in his posture. Taller, not stiff, and she would have noticed that. He was fairly certain she noticed everything, but she gave no sign. They were met almost immediately by Caroline, the firm's head of client relations, who had the social instincts of someone who had spent 30 years making rooms of strangers feel like old friends. She greeted Simone first, then Daniel, and then she looked at the small distance between them and arrived at a conclusion that registered on her face, in the specific way that the interesting sort of conclusion always does. "Well," Caroline said, and that was all she said, but it contained an entire sentence. "Caroline," Simone said, with the warmth she kept reserved for people she actually liked. "The room looks wonderful." "The hotel did most of it," Caroline said, though this was false and everyone knew it. "How are you both?" The both was deliberate. Caroline did not waste words. "Good," Daniel said. Simone's hand moved slightly at his back. Not a signal. Just still there. "Good," Caroline said, looking between them once more. "I'll let you get a drink before the speeches start. Daniel, you're on at 8:40, after the 3rd song, just so you know." "I know," he said. Caroline moved away, already reaching for her own glass, and Daniel caught the small tilt of her head as she went, the one that meant she was filing information away for a conversation she planned to have with someone before the evening was over. "She'll tell 4 people within the hour," he said quietly. 3, Simone said. "She's efficient." They got drinks, champagne for her, something with soda and lime for him, because he was speaking later, and he did not trust himself to speak precisely after more than one drink, which was a standard he had applied to himself since his mid-20s. They moved through the room. This was the part that could have been awkward, the navigation of a crowd with a person who, 6 days ago, had been only his employer, his admittedly extraordinary employer who ran a company of 200 people, with the calm focus of someone playing a game several moves ahead of everyone else. But it was not awkward. He did not have a word for what it was, exactly. But awkward was not it. She stood close. She talked. She asked questions of people they stopped to greet, with the interested manner of someone who had retained everything she had ever been told, which she had, and people responded to this the way people always did when they felt genuinely heard. They became warmer, more open, more willing to say the true thing rather than the polite one. She introduced him to 2 people he didn't know, not as Daniel Osei, VP of Finance, but as Daniel, plainly, with a slight pause before the name that contained something he couldn't interpret. He shook hands. He made the right remarks. He was fluent, not performing. She had been right about that distinction. He saw Lydia at 8:14. He knew it was 8:14, because he had glanced at his watch 3 minutes before, calculating how much time remained before his speech. And then he looked up and across the room, and she was there. She was standing near the far wall with a group of 4 people he didn't recognize, except for one, Paul, a mutual friend who had been very careful for 2 years to never mention Lydia in Daniel's presence. Paul, it turned out, had simply been waiting for a room where mentioning was unavoidable. And the man beside Lydia, standing in the easy, comfortable way of someone who had been standing beside her for a while now, was tall, with a kind face and the relaxed posture of someone who did not find parties stressful, which Daniel had always found parties slightly stressful, and had managed it by being very competent at them, which was not the same thing. Lydia was laughing at something the man had said. She laughed the same way she always had. He had forgotten, he realized, that he remembered exactly how she laughed. "You're 7 o'clock," Simone said, very quietly, close to his ear. It was not 7 o'clock. It was a direction. She had already located Lydia without him pointing her out, which meant she had either done her research or she was simply very good at reading a room, and the answer was probably both. "I see her," he said. "I know you do," she said. "Take a breath." He took a breath. "I'm fine," he said. "I know that too," she said. "Take the breath anyway." He did. They did not go to Lydia immediately. This was not avoidance. It was correct, because the alternative was to walk directly across the room to his ex-wife, which would have been its own kind of statement. Instead, they moved naturally through the room, stopping at one table, then another, and the movement gradually brought them within range of the wall where Lydia was standing with her group. Paul saw them first. He had the expression of a man who had been hoping, privately, that something like this might happen, and was now experiencing the complicated feeling of watching a hope materialize into a real event, with real stakes. "Daniel," Paul said, with the particular warmth of someone who was relieved and nervous in equal measure, "I was wondering if you'd made it." "I had a speech scheduled," Daniel said. "I don't miss things I'm scheduled for." "No," Paul said. "No, you really don't." He looked at Simone, and there was a visible recalibration happening behind his eyes. "And you've—" "Paul," Simone said, extending her hand, and her voice had the relaxed quality it only had with people she considered interesting, rather than important. "Simone." "Paul Wheeler," he said, shaking her hand and looking slightly dazzled, which was a common response to Simone, in contexts outside the office. And then Lydia turned. It was the kind of moment that could not be prepared for, despite the fact that Daniel had been preparing for it all week. Because preparation worked on the rational level, and what happened in the moment a person you had built a life with looked at you from across a small gathering of people was not rational. It was immediate. It was the body before the mind. She looked at him the way she always had, openly, without the kind of guarded assessment that most people used in awkward situations. Lydia had never been guarded. It was one of the things he had loved most about her, and one of the things that had made their ending feel so clean and so devastating at the same time. She had looked at him with that same openness on the last evening of their marriage, and said, quietly, that she thought they had run out of road. "Daniel," she said now. "Lydia," he said. She smiled. It was a real smile. This was the part that was hardest to explain to people who had not been through it. That the affection didn't disappear. It just didn't have anywhere to live anymore. Her eyes moved to Simone. And this was the moment when Simone did the thing that Daniel would think about later, not because it was dramatic but because it was so precisely right. She did not step in or make herself known or perform. She simply turned slightly toward Lydia with an easy, open expression and let the silence do exactly 3 seconds of work before she said, "Hi, I'm Simone," in the voice she used when she was completely comfortable. Which Simone Adeyemi never was, in a room full of people. Except apparently tonight. Lydia's expression did the small thing that perceptive people's expressions do when they are recalibrating. Not a flinch, not surprise exactly, but a moment of taking in new information and adjusting accordingly. "Lydia," she said, "it's nice to meet you." "Likewise," Simone said. The man beside Lydia extended his hand to Daniel. His name was Callum. He was pleasant and direct, and his handshake was neither too firm nor too loose, and Daniel disliked him not at all, which somehow made everything harder. The 5 of them talked for 7 minutes. He knew because he tracked it involuntarily. They talked about the venue and about the firm's performance. and about a client that Lydia's company had in common with Adeyemi Financial Solutions. Lydia asked Simone a question about the firm's approach to something, and Simone answered it in the way she always answered work questions, with the ease of someone discussing something they'd thought about long before the question arrived. And then Lydia looked at Daniel. "You look good," she said. She meant it. That was always the worst thing about Lydia. She meant things. He looked at Simone, and she was already looking at him. He did not think about it. He did not calculate the moment, or assess it, or weigh it against the plan they had discussed in an office on Monday morning. He simply leaned forward and he kissed her. And the world did the thing it does in moments like this, when everything you thought you were doing turns out to have a different name. It contracted. Just the two of them. Just that. Just the brief warmth of her mouth and the faint sound of the room falling into a background he was no longer tracking. Her hand found the lapel of his jacket, not pulling him in. Just there. Present. He stepped back. The room expanded again. 300 people. A chandelier that knew what it was doing. The band beginning the third song of the evening. Lydia was looking at them both with an expression he could not fully read. There was something in it that was not envy, exactly, but was close to recognition. The look of someone who sees a thing they understand. "It was lovely to meet you," she said to Simone. "You too," Simone said, and it was the same voice as before. Level, warm, entirely composed. Callum said something agreeable about the evening, and Paul said something slightly too cheerful, and the group dissolved as groups do, when a moment has concluded, and everyone is privately processing it at different speeds. Daniel did not look at Simone immediately. He looked at the room, at the gold light on the tables, at the band, at the specific angle of the chandelier. "That was the right moment," Simone said quietly. "Yes," he said. They were still standing inside the small radius she had drawn on a notepad 7 days ago. Neither of them moved out of it. The speech was at 8:40. He delivered it in 4 minutes and 12 seconds, which was 12 seconds over the allotted time, and nobody noticed or minded. He spoke about the company's third quarter, with the precision and the faint warmth that made financial reports feel like something people actually wanted to hear. He got through it, without once looking at the table in the center right of the room, where he knew, without checking, that Simone was sitting. He looked once. She was listening. Not watching him perform. Listening, the way she did everything. He finished. He sat back down. He picked up his drink. The evening continued, and at some point the tension he had been carrying since 6:47 on Monday morning, the taut, precise, poorly managed weight of it, became something else. Not nothing. Something else. He did not have a name for it yet, but he was fairly sure it didn't belong in column A or column B. He was fairly sure it was its own thing entirely. Monday happened the way Mondays do after a weekend that has rearranged something. Daniel arrived at the office at 7:22. He made coffee in the small kitchen on the 14th floor, because it was too early for the place on the ground floor to be open, and because doing something ordinary helped him feel like the day was ordinary, which it was. It was a Monday. There was a 9 o'clock call with a client. There was a budget review at 11. Owen had left 3 calendar items in his inbox on Friday afternoon that needed responses. These were regular things, and he was going to treat them as regular things, because the alternative was to stand in his kitchen again, holding cold coffee, and doing nothing useful. He sat at his desk. He opened the 9 o'clock call notes. He looked at the notes for 3 minutes, and then looked out the glass partition toward the corridor. Simone's office was on the floor above. He knew this. He had known this for 14 months. He had no reason, today, to think about what was happening on the floor above, because the floor above was where it always was, and Simone was where she always was, and the two of them had carried out a single evening arrangement that had concluded when they left the hotel on Saturday night, in the same car, sitting with the same considered space between them as when they had arrived, except that the ride home was quieter, and the quiet was different from the quiet on the way there. She had said goodnight at the curb in front of her building. He had said goodnight at the curb in front of her building. The car had driven away. He had not composed a message. He had started one on Saturday night and then deleted it. He had started a different version on Sunday morning and deleted that too. Every draft sounded like something other than what it actually was, and he was not prepared to articulate what it actually was. So he had put his phone down and made breakfast and done the crossword in the paper and been very reasonable about the entire thing. The 9 o'clock call was with a client named Barry Sinclair who had strong opinions about quarterly forecasting and a talent for expressing them at significant length. Daniel managed the call in 51 minutes, which was 9 minutes faster than last quarter, and he counted this as a small but real victory. At 10 past 10, he walked to the printer and collected a document. At 11, he sat in the budget review and did the thing he always did in meetings, took careful notes, asked specific questions, and kept his face professionally composed even when the finance manager from operations made the same incorrect assumption about depreciation schedules that he had made in the previous 3 meetings. At 12:45, he was in the corridor outside the meeting room, and he nearly walked straight into Simone. She was coming from the direction of the lifts, with a folder under her arm, and her phone to her ear. She looked at him with the look she had for most things, clear-eyed, present, slightly ahead. She nodded. He nodded. She walked past. "How's the quarterly looking?" she said, without taking the phone from her ear, as though she were saying it to whoever was on the call. "Fine," he said. She walked on. He stood in the corridor for a moment, and then he went back to his office, and he sat down, and he did not open the spreadsheet. He thought about how 4 words and a nod could feel like a door closing in a house you didn't know you had been standing at the entrance of. He thought about this for 6 minutes, and then he answered Owen's 3 emails and called a contact at an advisory firm about a question that had been sitting in his inbox since Thursday. He was fine. He was at work. The work was here, and it was plentiful, and he was good at it, and being good at something you valued was not a small thing, and he had always known how to put his energy into what was in front of him. He did not think about the gala for the rest of Monday. He thought about the gala on Tuesday morning, Wednesday, and both halves of Thursday. He thought about Lydia, which he had expected. He thought about the look on her face when she said, "You look good." Not the words, but the completeness behind them. The way Lydia said things as though she had cleared the room first, just to make sure the true thing had space to stand in. He had been loved, very genuinely, by Lydia Crane. He understood this better now than he had when they were married, and he understood something else too, that he had been waiting for 2 years to feel what he'd felt at the end of the gala, which was not grief, and not longing, but the particular kind of quiet that comes when you finally set down something that has been heavy. He had set it down. What he thought about on Wednesday and Thursday, the parts he had not expected, was not Lydia at all. It was a collar, a hand across a dinner table. The way Simone had said, "That's interesting." Isn't it, with nothing in her voice and something in her face? The look she had given him just before he turned to Lydia, that fractional second when she was already looking at him as though she had been tracking the room not for the evening's social geography but for him, specifically. On Friday morning he was in the elevator at 7:51, and the doors opened on the 16th floor before they reached the 14th, and Simone stepped in. She was carrying a tablet and a coffee that was not from the ground floor place, which meant she had been in early enough to make it herself, which meant something about the week she'd had. The doors closed. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. She looked at the tablet. He looked at the floor indicator. "Did it help?" she said. He turned to look at her. She was still looking at the tablet, though he was fairly sure she was not reading anything on it. He thought about the question. Did the evening help? Did the performance, the plan, the careful preparation, and the exactly right moment kiss in the ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel help him feel the thing he had needed to feel, which was the ability to be in the same room as his ex-wife, without coming apart at the infrastructure? "Yes," he said. She nodded, in the way she nodded at things that confirmed a hypothesis she had already formed. The elevator arrived at the 14th floor. He should have stepped out. He didn't step out. "Simone," he said. She turned. Not the way she turned in meetings, assessing, ready. Just turned, simply, the way a person turns when they hear their name said without anything attached to it. He had no sentence ready. He had been constructing sentences for 14 months in the company of this woman, and he had never once been without the right one. Numbers always added up. Reports always landed. He had always known the thing to say in any room he entered, including her office, including client calls, including the gala. He did not have a sentence. She looked at him for a long moment. One condition, she said quietly. That was the deal. She stepped out of the elevator. He watched the doors close on a corridor that was already empty. He went to his desk. He opened column A. He stared at column A for longer than was productive. He typed one sentence into a fresh document and read it back and deleted it. He called Owen in and asked about the status of two things that he already knew the status of, just to have something to do with his voice. Owen answered both questions and then paused in the doorway. "Is everything all right?" Owen said, with the careful expression of someone who had spent 18 months watching someone manage things they didn't discuss. "Yes," Daniel said. Owen clearly did not fully believe this, but was professionally gracious enough not to say so. "Okay," Owen said, and left. Daniel sat at his desk until 6:15, which was late but not unusual, and the office emptied around him in the gradual way it always did on Fridays. And at 6:17, he put on his jacket and took the lift and walked out into a Friday evening that was doing everything a Friday evening in this city did. Good light, noise, people moving towards something or away from something, with the particular energy that the end of a week generates. He walked, not toward anything specific, just through the city, the way he had walked on the Monday evening after Lydia's name appeared in his inbox, needing movement more than destination. He walked for 40 minutes and then stopped outside a restaurant he knew, and for a moment he thought about going in, and he thought about the table near the back where he had sat with a woman who had reached across a dinner table without ceremony and adjusted his collar and told him he did that when he was nervous. He had not been nervous that evening. She had said that was interesting. He walked on. He had been carrying something for 2 years. He had been calling it grief and sometimes calling it adjustment, and occasionally, in the company of his therapist, calling it loss, which was more accurate. And all of those were true. But there was something underneath them, something that had nothing to do with Lydia specifically, and everything to do with what he had done after Lydia, which was stop. He had stopped being interested in what happened next. Not dramatically, not in any way anyone would notice, just quietly, competently, going to work and doing excellent work and going home and doing the crossword and making breakfast and occasionally having dinner with friends and being, by every observable measure, a functioning person who was managing his life sensibly. He had been managing his life like a maintenance project, not building it, managing it. And then he had stood in a ballroom and kissed a woman who had agreed to one evening in one condition, and the woman had put her hand on his lapel just briefly, and he had stepped back and looked at a chandelier and understood that something had moved in him, not because of the arrangement or the strategy or the specific theater of it, but because of all the small things that had accumulated in the 11 days before the gala, the dinner on Hadley Street, the honest conversation, the collar, the circle on a notepad, the word fluency used to describe a thing that turned out to be real. He went home. He stood in his apartment, which was clean and well organized, and contained everything he needed and nothing he hadn't chosen deliberately, and he looked at it as though seeing it from slightly outside himself. He wanted more than this. Not more things. Not a bigger apartment or a different city. He wanted more of the particular quality of attention that had been present on Wednesday evening on Hadley Street, when someone had looked at him long enough to hear what he actually said, and had replied not with comfort but with honesty. He sat down. He opened the notepad, not the spreadsheet, the physical notepad with the small circle she had drawn on the 3rd page. He stared at the circle. He picked up his pen. He put it down. He picked it up again. He drew a second circle, smaller, overlapping the first at the edge, not consuming it, just touching it, the way two things touch when they are close enough to matter, but haven't yet decided what to do about it. He stared at what he had drawn. Then he put the notepad on the table, and he went to bed, and he did not sleep for a long time, but when he did sleep, it was without the particular heaviness that had been sitting on the top of the night for 2 years. Something had shifted. He didn't know yet what he was going to do about it. But he knew he was going to do something. That was already a different kind of start. He did not go to her on Saturday. He went on Monday. Not Monday morning. Not the professional early hour when people arrived with their defenses already organized and their voices calibrated for work. He waited until 11, until the firm was well into the rhythm of a regular week, and Simone was in the place she was always in when the week was running well, her office, at her desk, thinking about something that he was not going to ask her about, and she was not going to tell him, because that was not what he had come to talk about. He knocked. She was not on a call. She looked up, took in the fact that he did not have the Q3 folder, or any professional reason visible, and waited. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Then come in," she said. He came in. He did not sit down. He stood at the edge of her desk the way he had stood the first time, when he had told her about the gala, about Lydia, about the need for one evening, and the willingness to ask for something he had no clear right to ask. "I want to take you to dinner," he said. She looked at him. "Not a rehearsal," he said. "Not a cover story. Not a favor in exchange for anything. Dinner. You and me. Wednesday evening. The restaurant on Hadley Street if you're willing to go back. Or somewhere else if you'd prefer." He had prepared for several responses. He had been building financial models long enough to know that every scenario needs contingencies. She said, "I told you the condition was one kiss." "I know," he said. "The evening is concluded," she said. "We agreed. We agreed to one evening," he said. "I'm asking for another one. Different terms. No performance, no agreement, no arrangement. Just dinner between two people who had a very good dinner on Wednesday and a week of pretending it meant nothing, when it fairly clearly meant something." She was quiet. Not the working quiet, when she was processing a problem. The other quiet. The one he had first noticed at the gala, when he had said her name in the elevator and she had turned and gone very still, like the moment just before a weather system announces itself. "You came here because of Lydia," she said. "I started here because of Lydia," he said. "Yes, I'm aware of that. I'm not trying to rewrite the starting point." He paused. He had prepared this part least, because the parts you prepare least are the ones that tell the truth. "I went home Friday evening and walked for 40 minutes and came back and sat in my apartment, and the thing I thought about was not Lydia. It was a collar. She was perfectly still. And a restaurant where someone talked to me like I was worth listening to," he said. "And a notepad with a circle on it, and the way you said that's interesting, like you were taking a note you intended to come back to." She looked at him for long enough that he felt the weight of it, not oppressive, not assessing, but present. She was actually looking at him, not at the professional version of him, not at the VP of finance, not at the manageable variable in a situation that had needed managing, just at him. "I don't do things halfway," she said. "I know," he said. "That means if I say yes to dinner, it isn't dinner in the way it was before," she said. "It isn't preparation or fluency practice or any other useful word. It's actually the thing, and the thing is more complicated." "I know that too," he said. "And we work together," she said. "We are very effective at working together. I value that." "So do I," he said. "I'm not asking you to risk something you value. I'm asking you to consider that the thing I'm describing and the thing we are at work are not in competition. They're separate. I'm good at keeping things in their correct columns." Something happened at the corner of her mouth. Not a smile. The predecessor of a smile. The variable that, in the right conditions, became a smile. "Let me think about it," she said. He nodded. He picked up nothing from her desk, because he had brought nothing. He walked to the door. "Daniel," she said. He turned. "Your collar," she said. "Left side." He reached up and fixed it. He hadn't known, again, that it had moved. "How long have you known I do that?" he said. "Since the second week you worked here," she said. "You do it before you say something you've decided on, but are still slightly afraid of saying." He stood at the door. "I'll let you think," he said. He went back downstairs. He sat at his desk, and Owen came in at 12 with a stack of things that required attention, and he attended to them, and the afternoon moved in the reliable, purposeful way that working afternoons moved when you had things to do, and were good at doing them. He did not look at his phone waiting for a message. He did not reconstruct the conversation in his office at lunch. He worked, and it was enough. And at 5:30 he packed his bag and went home and cooked a meal that required more steps than a Tuesday meal probably needed, because something about the process of doing a careful thing with your hands was useful to him when the inside of his head was occupied. She did not send a message that evening. She did not send a message on Tuesday. He made column A notes. He answered client emails. He reviewed a contract that Owen had flagged and found 2 things worth flagging back. He had a video call with an external advisor that ran 20 minutes long and was worth the extra time. He was, by every observable and internal measure, fine. He was also waiting, and he had known when he walked into her office that waiting was going to be part of it, and he had accepted that with his eyes open. Simone Adeyemi did not make decisions under pressure. She made decisions when the reasoning was complete and the position was clear. He respected this profoundly. He had worked for someone before her who made decisions quickly and confidently and with magnificent, consistent wrongness, and he had learned to value the opposite. On Wednesday morning, he received a message from an unknown number that turned out to be Simone's personal number, which she had never given him because she had never needed to, because their entire professional relationship had operated through the office systems and the occasional direct meeting, without any need for personal contact. The message contained one line: 7 o'clock. The green door. I prefer the fish. He read it twice. He put his phone face down on the desk. He sat there for a moment with his hand flat on the desk, and the specific sensation in his chest that he recognized now. He had felt it on a Monday morning 6 days after a divorce when he'd decided, quietly and without telling anyone, that he was going to leave his old firm and find somewhere that required more of him, a decision in the body before it became a decision in the mind. He typed back, I'll be there at 6:50. Her reply arrived in 40 seconds. I know. He was there at 6:48. She arrived at 7 exactly. She sat down across from him and looked at the menu and then set it down, because she already knew what she wanted, and he had not opened his menu because he also knew what he wanted. And the server arrived, and they both ordered without hesitation, and the server left, and the table between them was exactly the same table as 3 weeks ago, and entirely different. I thought about what you said, she told him. I thought about it more than I typically think about things. Is that good? He said. It's information, she said. I find I think extensively about things that matter to me, and minimally about things that don't. So yes, I suppose it's good. He looked at her. I've been running this company for 7 years, she said. I have made a considerable number of correct decisions in that time. I've also made a handful of decisions I revised, which I don't enjoy, but which I accept as part of the process. The decisions I've most regretted are not the wrong ones. They are the ones I didn't make, because the timing was complicated. She looked at him steadily. The timing is complicated, she said. Yes, he said. And I'm telling you that it doesn't change my answer, she said. It's still complicated. I'm answering yes inside the complication. He said nothing for a moment. Just yes? He said. Did you need a longer word? She said. No, he said. Yes is the right length. She picked up her water glass, and there was the predecessor of the smile again, the variable, and then the smile itself, brief, real, not for anyone who happened to be looking, but for the table, for him, for the particular geometry of the evening. He had seen Simone Adeyemi in rooms full of people, and watched them rearrange themselves around her presence. He had watched her dismantle bad arguments with 2 sentences. He had watched her run a company with the kind of focused, careful commitment that some people gave their whole lives toward and never achieved. He had worked alongside her for 14 months and respected her, honestly and fully, in the way you respected someone who was excellent at something that mattered. He had not, until 3 weeks ago, known what she was like at a table in a quiet restaurant where the only thing required was to be a person. She was extraordinary at being a person. They ate. They talked. There was something different in the talking this time, a permission that hadn't quite existed before. Even at the other dinner, even at the gala, they were not building a cover story or establishing fluency or preparing for anything. They were just 2 people who had been in each other's company for 14 months and had only recently started looking directly at what that meant. She told him about why she had built the company, Not the official version, which he had heard in board meetings and read in the company's founding documents, but the real version, which involved a conversation with a former mentor who had told her, at 30, that her ambitions were too large for the room she was in. "So I made a larger room," she said. "That sounds like you," he said. "Does it?" She tilted her head. "What does it sound like about me, specifically?" "That you don't accept the room you're in as the only available room," he said. "That when something doesn't fit, you don't reduce the thing, you change the container." She looked at him for a moment. "You've been paying attention," she said. 14 months, he said. "You know," she said, "I was aware, quite early on, that you were someone I needed to keep at a professional distance. Not because you were problematic. The opposite." He waited. "You were too easy to talk to," she said. "At board meetings you made the right arguments in the right order, and I agreed with you more than was professionally convenient. I like being the most correct person in a room. I find it clarifying. And I disrupted that," he said. "Mildly," she said. "On 3 occasions in 14 months, which is a good record, actually." He smiled. He was aware that he was smiling in a way that was not about anything in particular except the company he was in, which was new. "I thought about the notepad," she said. "The circle." He looked at her. "I looked at it before I came tonight," she said. "I still had it. I took it from the restaurant the first time." She paused. "You drew a second circle." I noticed. He had not told her he had drawn a second circle. He understood then that she had known about the second circle before Monday morning. That she had held that information while he stood at her desk and made his case. That she had already been 3 steps ahead, because she was always 3 steps ahead, and she had let him arrive at his own pace. "You knew," he said. "I thought you needed to be the one to come to the door," she said, "so I waited." He looked at her across the table. "That was patient of you," he said. "I'm very patient," she said, "about things I've decided are worth it." The evening ended later than the previous one. When they walked out through the green door, the street was quiet, and the night air had the particular quality of late evenings in this city, that he had always found better than the day. Settled, easy, everything in its right place. They walked together for half a block without a destination, which was new. "The condition was 1 kiss," he said. "It was," she said. "And the condition has been met." "It has," she said. "So what applies now," he said, "is whatever we decide applies now." She turned to look at him, and the city was behind her, and the light from the restaurant was still reaching them, and she had the expression she had worn at the gala, not before the kiss, not during it, but in the moment just after, when she had not stepped back, and the room had expanded again, and there had been something in her face that was not performance, and not arrangement, but something with weight to it. "Now," she said, "we apply whatever is actually true." He reached up and fixed the left side of his collar, which had folded in on itself sometime in the last hour. She watched him do it. "You do that when you've decided something," she said. "I know," he said. "You told me." "I told you it was nerves," she said. "That too," he said. She looked at him for a moment that was not long but was full. Then she said, "Walk me to the car." He walked her to the car. At the door she paused, and she looked at him with the clear, complete attention that she kept for the things that mattered to her, and she did not say anything, and he did not say anything, and the space between them had the quality of something that had been decided without needing to be announced. She got in the car. He watched it pull away from the curb. He stood on the pavement for a moment, and the city did what cities do. Carried on, enormous and indifferent and full of people living their lives in every direction, and he thought about a spreadsheet with 2 columns, and a blank space in column B, and he thought about a notepad with 2 circles touching at the edge, and he thought about the word yes said inside a complication, by someone who had 7 years of experience building rooms large enough to hold the things that mattered. He thought about all the small things that had accumulated before he understood what they were adding up to. He thought about a collar that folded when he was nervous and also, it turned out, when he had decided something. He had decided something. He walked home through the city with his hands in his pockets, and the particular lightness of a man who has put down something heavy and picked up something better, and the column B of his life, for the first time in 2 years, was no longer blank. It had exactly the right thing in it. And for once, he did not feel the need to analyze it further. He let the number stand.